Hello and welcome to another video by me, Ginger Bill. Today I kind of want to discuss something different. So it's a commentary on a comment kind of thing, which I found about. So this was from an Odin colleague of mine who found this comment from Andrew Kelly, who is the creator of the Zig programming language. And my colleague kind of said this comment kind of read a bit like a commentary on Odin and or Jonathan Blow's language, JAI, how you pronounce that. So I would like to show you it today. I'm going to read it through and then I'll just want to do a comment on it if that's fine. So here it is. It's on a GitHub page. It's on issues 3320. And it's a bit of a way down. So this was from over a year ago, from the comments from the 21st of July 2021. So from Andrew Kelly, just going to read it. So someone was asking effectively, could we have a sloppy mode in Zig so that it doesn't always error on things there where we're just being sloppy or so we could be hacking friendly or whatever it is. So that's kind of the general gist of the comment. And then eventually Andrew's kind of, this is what is gone. So you can see it's got some upvotes and some downvotes. Oh, people up and down like, oh, we don't know if we like this or not. But the first one says, here's a way to think about unused locals and unused parameter errors. And this is Andrew speaking, not myself, but you know what I mean, I'm just reading what is written. The Zig language is designed to prevent bugs by making strategic use of friction. For example, this is why coercing a U16 to a U32 works without any syntax at all. And he links to where he's talking about. Yet to go the other way around requires the friction of the built-in call intcast. Intcast does not mean your code is wrong. It documents code that correlates with a higher chance of bugs. Likewise, Zig supports unused parameters and unused locals. However, such things are indeed correlated with a higher chance of there being a bug. So you have to confirm the non-use is intentional with additional syntax, just like with intcast. Friction is, by nature, uncomfortable. And people seek comfort, meaning that people seek to program in a way that a language does not induce friction. Making use of all these variables and parameters, even while experiment corresponds with the principle of you ain't going to need it, or YAGNI as some people say, which is a programming style unfamiliar to some. To those who have already taken YAGNI to heart, it will feel like the language is guiding them down a path they already want to go. For those who do not program this style, it will feel like the language is fighting you. For young programmers, it will shape their preferences as they develop with their own programming style. The Zig language is opinionated. There is one canonical way to do things. There will be no sloppy mode, no divergence of compile errors from debug to release. For those who find their own programming style to be in conflict with the language, I do have a suggestion, which is tooling. It would be reasonable to make a command line tool that run and it fixes all the unused parameter errors by adding the assigned to the blank identifier, as what we call it in Odin, I'm not sure what they call it in Zig, just the underscore, in the appropriate place, and automatically removing them where needed. By the way, I think Andy did this the other day. Literally added the new tooling to do this the other day, which is quite nice, so for people to know. So he's had this at least in his head for a while. So back to the reading through this. IDEs can have this button. You press, the automate does this for you. Eclipse has had this for ages for organizing Java imports, and frankly, it's perfect. You want a sloppy mode? That's fine, but it's not officially recognized concept in the Zig language. What is sloppy is very personal and belongs in an individual's development experience. Final point I want to make, this is Andrew again, so sorry, the first priority of the Zig language design goal is the ability for a person to quickly and comprehensively peruse an unfamiliar code base and really understand it completely, holding it all in their head, comfortably able to maintain it without worrying about unknown unknowns. Not allow shadowing, not allowing to use variables, and requiring the use of const are all part of achieving this goal. So when he means use const, just put a comment there. Instead of using var, if a thing never gets referenced, like never gets mutated or anything like that, then it should have been const in the first place and they'll just make it a bug. Making writing code from scratch fun was never a goal of Zig. Personally, I think it's fun to make great software. But what's fun have to do with the application and end user experience rather than the minutiae about the language? A carpenter might have fun building something out of wood using a hammer and nails, but that doesn't make a fun hammer. They just want an effective hammer, and the fun part is the part where they're building something. Okay, that is Andy's comment done. Let's put my little commentary on top. So the first bit thing is things like Zig language designed to prevent us by strategic use of friction. Odin does the same thing. Odin actually is very kind of opinionated, as Zig is here, but it's trying to have friction, but you don't notice it. I've discussed this before and even said it down before. Zig is trying to be very maximize explicitness, but Odin is trying to minimize implicitness, which are not the same things. Even though you think, oh, they're both are double negatives, they should be exactly the same thing. No. So sometimes implicitness is fine. So my view is with the friction is that you want to nudge people in certain ways when they're doing design in the language, but that nudging is a friction, but people don't notice it. So I want to be more implicit with the friction, and it just people naturally go in one direction already, even if I'm not explicitly stating in your mind, hey, go in this direction, please. More of a, I'm going to guide you there anyway, especially with the language feature and such. So the first thing here, which I find is very interesting, is coercing from U16 to U32 does not require any syntax, but going the other way does. Now in Odin, you have to have syntax for both. You have to do an explicit cast either way, because this works because of Odin has, at the semantic level, distinct types. Even if the underlying type is equivalent, like it's an alias, like for instance, you got a U16 and someone's called it unsigned integer 16, and they're just aliases of each other, those are equivalent, but you could make distinct, like you've got your own handle, which is a distinct, is backed by a U16, that is completely distinct. You have to do an explicit cast between the two of them. But even there, many people are going, why don't you allow casting between U16 to U32 automatically? There's no information loss is usually the common argument. But in Odin, it's like, there is information lost. You've lost information about the type. You've not lost information in the value. I agree. The compile time value, the runtime value is not lost, but the type there is. And to me, making that explicit that you're doing the casting is important. What I focused in Odin was trying to make it that stuff like that would be one, it would be very, in a sense, less friction to do it. Like, you could do it, but make it still be obvious that you're doing it. But at the same time, you don't need to do all these casting in the first place. So nudge you in different ways. That's like the default integer type in Odin is int, which is a register-sized integer, not like 4 bytes traditionally on most platforms in C, but like it's 4 bytes. So on 64-bit platforms, it'll be 64 bits, so 8 bytes. On 32-bit platforms, it will be 32 bits or 4 bytes or et cetera, like that. So that's kind of where it's doing it. So if you default to that, things start making a lot bit easier to deal with. Same with all the other stuff. It's like the friction is, there is friction if you are trying to be more friction, but it's trying to push you into the more, hey, there's actually usually a better default way of doing things, go this way. There'll be less friction, but therefore you're actually already writing in a way there's not, it's already a kind of wanting to do. Not myself as a designer, but like it's going to be better in general. And that's fine. Another thing is like unused parameters, unused locals. So I don't know if this is true anymore, but it might be. I haven't used it in a little while since there's been new updates going around. But for me, how do I put this? The default mode in Odin is it will allow for unused variables in not all cases, but a lot of cases, and unused imports and unused parameters, and also unused. What else? Unused variables, unused imports. Oh, and yeah, shadowing as well. So basically, like, wait, what? I'll explain. So the first thing is unused locals. When I'm developing, I'm much a better. I don't find that unused variables are a bug. They are something when you're developing. The thing is, I will opt into strict forceness. I call it vet or vetting. Vetting the code and the style of those kind of parameters with a flag. I do the -vet, and it will force the code to actually adhere to that style. So for Odin, we've kind of opted into this, while Zig is kind of like, hey, no, we're just enforcing it, full stop. Not opting out, can't opt in, or anything like that. Which is also similar to what Go did. Go has this kind of like, oh, if you've got an unused import, an unused variable, or whatever, we'll complain into until you use it, which is effectively assigning that to the blank identifier. Which is, okay, understandable, whatever. The issue that I have there is that commits, if you're forcing this every time you build, it's like, look, I kind of just want to get things working first without having to worry about correctness before stuff. I know many of it doesn't work, but I usually just want a quick iteration style. And for me, I want to enforce that effectively when I'm wanting to merge that with other code. Like maybe not necessarily at the commit level, but maybe at the pull request level if you're using GitHub language. Or when like, oh, I'm merging it with someone else's code base, that kind of point. Like I want to make sure that these things mesh together. Now we could force it at every single time you compile, which makes sense like when Go was doing it, because they're dealing with it, Google, and it's just easier for them at a big scale. Like just force everyone to the code style at the language level rather than in the tooling level. there's where the differences are. So there's that. Now, I'm just trying to think how to phrase this. There's where the differences lie. So I don't necessarily think some of those things there. So one comment I said earlier, people are going flashing their heads like, what are you saying? Like, shadowing is allowed in Odin? Like, yes. One of the things I understand why people don't like shadowing. And I think in every single case when people complain about shadowing, it's because they've used really short variable names. Like, I mean, single letter. And then they just reuse them because there's only 26 letters you can use, pretty much, if you ignore case. Because that's all there are on a normal Latin keyboard, Latin style, like base keyboard. So the question is not why is shadowing a bug, more of a why are you using single letter identifiers? Long ones you cannot run into it. But I say, okay, you do run into it. And you do have even a long one you run into it and it was magic books. Okay, shadowing, it can be an issue. I don't disagree with that. But it's more of a lot of the time when I'm programming, I'm refactoring code. Like, I'm not actually just writing new code. I am like, oh, I'm moving this a bit around. And a very good example where we have short identifiers would be a loop. And like you have it like, okay, for like the element, comma, I in an array, the I variable may get reused in places. So that would force some shadowing issues, obviously. But the problem is to correct those shadowing issues, I would argue introduces more bugs. Because that I has already been used in the parent scope. So that means by default, I've seen people, okay, this one collides. Okay, I'll change the nested scope rather than the parent scope to be the correct one. Now, you have to get into a good habit of changing the parent one first, not the nested one. Even though the error messages will come in the nested, most people just correct the error messages as they go. Again, people are lazy. They don't like friction, so they'll just go the easy path. So this is one of those, like, honestly, you see it, if you've probably done it yourself and you're like, oh yeah, I never even noticed I did that. So people correct this, and it's more, you just introduce a bug now, because now you use the different loop index from the parent one, maybe. Like, not the inner nested one, but the parent one above it. And that new index kind of is gone a little bit awry, is the best way of putting it. And I'm trying to think of a good way. It's just, I think that's more bug prone by enforcing that style. So not having it be a very good place as loop variables, having shadowing is a feature. Then when you come to the vet mode, a better way of doing it is you tell the user, like, what should you do? Oh, you should get the parent and say you should change the parent's names first, and then the parent will actually, everything that's using the parent will then throw the errors and should be fixing that. And that is another tooling problem. So something that both the language and external tools can actually aid with that in that regard. So it's a very different thing. So I know people find my view shadowing is like a big bug, and yes, all the things, but it's like, look, it's a cost-benefit analysis, and you've got to understand where the problems. But this has gone a bit too much of a tangent on that specific topic, so let's go back to the core of this article, which is kind of the fourth paragraph now, second paragraph now, which is friction by nature is uncomfortable. People seek comfort, which means they don't want to do the way it introduced friction. And I agree, which is why in Odin we nudge people. We have friction, but the friction also kind of pushes you in a different direction by default, because most people enjoy programming in Odin. It's a very enjoyable language to make your programs in, and it's enjoyable. Therefore, making the programs is an enjoyable process. But the reason is that, yes, it's opinionated. It usually has one canonical way to do things. Not always. There are exceptions to that rule. But it does kind of push you in certain ways on how to design your things in general. But because it does that, people don't notice the friction. So it's effectively, instead of being like, oh, the surfaces are really rough and there's loads of friction on it, but you can go anywhere within the surface, it's more of the surfaces are narrow and push you in ways, but they're very greased. Oh, God, these analogies are awful. Very bad, but I hope the thing is more of a, like, yes, you can go outside the boundaries if necessary, but you're more of it takes a bit more effort, if that makes sense. Yeah, but one thing I do agree with is that the error message shouldn't be that different between, like, the development builds. I won't call them debug, but the development builds and release. I do not think that should be the case. I do think maybe the builds, again, with vetting things are different, but that's not really different between release or development. That's just more of a, do you want to be pedantic or not? Is the best way of putting it. The last is the last paragraph here. It says final point. He says the first priority of Zig language is the ability for the person to quickly comprehend, peruse an unfamiliar code base and really understand it completely. Holding it all in their head and confidently able to maintain it without worrying about unknown unknowns. Now, the thing is, Odin has the similar design goal as well. Like, one of the main design goals is the principal least surprise. Like, showing, like, nudge people in a way to write to a certain extent where it's clear what is going on. You can actually read it as a code base. There's not too much syntactic noise. It's very clear, it's straightforward. You can read from top down to the bottom, and everything is clear to read. And in that way, you can understand and comprehend what is going on because it's clear to read. Now, when he says really understand it, I'm like, I don't think you could ever really understand something, any language, just by reading it. You still have to go through it. In fact, you have to go through the executing it through like a debugger to actually truly understand any debug. That's actually how I do things. You go through a debugger and you go step, and then you can actually understand where things and how they flow, usually. Because there's some things, even by reading it, sometimes the things like, oh, that's peculiar, like, okay, fine, but you can get a better thing. So in my opinion, it's clarity and principle of least surprise, which is the goal, which I know is not necessarily the goal of Zig. Because Zig is very opinioned, so is Odin technically, but they're in different ways. And this is, again, I'm not criticizing Zig here, by the way. I'm just stating different philosophies of how to do languages. Like, you may like Zig, that's great. If you may like Odin, that's great. You may like neither of them. You know what? That's great. And I mean that seriously. It's just like, it's very interesting to see how different language designers come about here and deal with it. Because one thing that Andy's done here is he's kind of saying, like, making writing code from scratch fun was never a goal of Zig. It's like, well, not really the goal in Odin either. The tool is enjoyable to use in Odin, but it's more of, I should say, when I'm using Odin to write tools, it is enjoyable. The language doesn't get in the way. The language is actually helping me write better tools. So, and therefore, it's now reinvigorated my joy for programming in that sense. And I see this a lot of time for people. Loads of people will say this in the Odin community, Odin programming language community, and they'll go like, yeah, like it's now a joy to program again. I'm not just frustrated with my tool. It does what it works. And this is why I say, Andy's put fun. I always say the word joy, because I don't think they're the same in this sense. I'm not having necessarily fun, but it's more of there is a joyful aspect there. I know they're not separate of a term, but whatever. And he says here, carpenter might have fun building something out of wood using hammer and nails, but they don't use a fun hammer. And the answer is, well, yes, I agree with that. But if your hammer is awful and doesn't do your job, you're not going to be having fun, are you? You want a hammer that is very well tailored, does your job really well, and then you don't even think about how, like, oh, this hammer is the job brilliant. It's not a fun hammer, but this is a really good hammer. This is a really good tool, and I can get on with my tool, and then I can actually make software, make wood or every carpenter or whatever with this particular really good tool. And then the tool itself is not joyful, but it gives you a joy of, well, the activity you're doing. Again, in this case, programming. And I think that's the distinction in the philosophy here. And I don't know if this was directed at Odin or JI or any other language, but it was one of those where, to me, I'm like, the distinction for me is not, the tool isn't fun or joyful itself, but because I'm trying to have a well-crafted tool, the tool, the purpose, the domain where I'm using this tool is fun. It is joyful. It is, I can actually solve problems in a way that I don't now have to fight the actual tool itself, because the tool is shoddy, for a lack of a better word. So hopefully I haven't been rambling for too long here. It's just nearly 20 minutes now, but yeah, I recommend reading this thread. I'll probably put, again, it's on Zig Issues. It's number 3320, so 3320, and talking about this. It's really good to read anyway, just read through the difference and it just shows the philosophy of Andrew Kelly's here, different views here. And again, I differ from Andrew, obviously. I highly recommend people check out different languages, not just Odin, but Zig as well, and many of the languages that are out here today. Like, again, the new ones coming out. Again, Rust is also another one people looking out there, or Swift, or Nim, or Go is a good one. Always other things. These are, they're not always necessarily in the same area. But it's just more of the new languages coming out, I'm thinking. So highly recommend read this. And again, thank you as always. Hope you enjoyed it, and leave a comment in the bottom below, and remember to like that smash button, because I said that wrong in one stream once. And don't forget to, if you want to subscribe, do it. I need to do all the YouTubery things at the end, obviously, because you need to do them, right? So thank you for listening, and goodbye.